Hello, everyone. This is Al Fadi, and we'd like to welcome you again to another episode of this fabulous series that we're going through, myself and Dr. Jay Smith, who is with me here in studio. And we've been talking about external, basically, evidence that shows that the problem has some issues, and the Quran, I should say, have some problems and issues related to not only its compilation, but also its writings. And there are some issues related to the dating, and there are some issues right now that we can talk about concerning corrections, erasures, and many other things that probably going to sound very weird and strange to the Muslim ear. Dr. J.
Yeah, thank you. This is good. We've always said that this is not our research, and we're very clear that you and I have not done the research.
That's correct.
You will be doing research on this area, but what we're doing in our job is to make sure that this research gets down into the public sphere, gets down to the laity, gets down to where people can hear it. That's why we're doing these videos. That's why all of the work that I do is to communicate what the researchers are finding. The researchers dare not do what we're doing, because if they were to say openly and publicly what they have found, that would shut down all of their research. They would not be invited back to those countries. There would be death threats possibly on them. And so that's why we, in some ways, have a unique job, a unique responsibility to get this out to the wider world.
Correct.
So just to make that caveat so everybody knows, this is not my research, it's not your research.
Absolutely.
And the material we're going to work on now with this episode, if you look at the slide, has been done by Dr. Dan Brubaker. Dr. Dan Brubaker is a scholar who decided to go around and find out, looking at the earliest manuscripts, to find out if there are any changes, corrections. And
to the manuscripts.
To the manuscripts, the earliest manuscripts. And he came across, he went to the 10 earliest manuscripts, and he found 7 different kinds of changes that you see up on the screen there. Insertions and erasers, erasers overwritten, overwriting, taping, selective covering overwritten. He wanted to find out he was thinking maybe 10, even 5 would do enough damage. Because what you're saying then, this is no longer eternal. It could not have been sent down by God. God
Right.
did not preserve it. If there was a Muhammad who did write it down, why then was it changed? Even one change would destroy any notion that there was no human intervention.
Correct.
And that change, that the idea that it has never been changed, would be challenged. So he was looking for these kind of corrections. Now let's look and see what he did. I introduced this material back in 2014, so it's almost 4 years old, what I'm going to introduce today. Nothing new, but nonetheless, absolutely powerful. He found 390 insertions.
Insertions alone.
That's right, just insertions. Now you can see there, look at those pictures there, Abdul. Can you see some insertions
Absolutely.
there?
And what we're saying to people here is, please look at the word that was added. And you don't even need to know Arabic, by the way. It's very obvious. Something strange was added that looks different. The thickness is different. The ink is different. The size is different. And
these are later insertions. Here's an example in the Topkapi manuscript with Surah 66, verse 8. On the left side, I'll read it, and you can read what the Hafs says today. On the left side, the Topkapi there says, O ye who believe, repent unto you give by it sincerely, until you give by it sincerely.
that's right.
Now, that has been changed to...
And the word, basically, Allah was added. That's
there
one of
you
it.
can see. Can you see the word Allah added on the left-hand side?
That's
you
right.
can see it's too small, isn't it?
That's right.
Completely different script.
And a different color also.
Even
All
a
right.
different color. So that's been added. The word Allah, the name of God, has been added to the script. Here is another insertion. In this case, it's chapter 3, verse 47. What was added is what he wills. Mayasha.
He creates what he wills.
And there it is above the word. Can you see it above the word? We've circled it in red there.
That's right.
Another example of insertion. This is in Surah 2, Ayah 137. Bimitli. You can see the bimitli has been kind of squeezed in there between 2 other letters.
Yeah.
You can see it doesn't fit. And we've circled it in red to show that this is a much later insertion. Here's one from the Bibliothèque Nationale. It's chapter 23, verse 86. And there you can see the word is above, isn't it? It's right above the line itself.
Yeah, the verse used to read, say, who is the God of the heavens and the earth? the heavens and a great, basically, a throne, and it was added, who is the God of the seven heavens.
So there, Al-Saba is added, the seventh heaven.
And I want to emphasize, Muslims believe there are seven heavens, but we can see here that it was added as a later time.
At a later time. Now, as we're doing this, can you see what's going on here? They're standardizing the text, aren't they?
And also theologically, they're fixing certain issues or maybe developing new theologies.
So we're watching the development of the Quran in these these examples that we're giving. Here's another one, chapter 49, verse 50. You can see they believe, and also now, what does it say in the 1924 text?
The believers.
So you can see again.
And by the way, what we want you to explain to our audience, I know this, but what is the 1924 text and what is Hafs in particular?
1924 text is the date that this final canonized text was created in Al-Azhar University in Cairo, 1920. So we're talking about 94 years ago. A group of scholars got together and they created the final text so there would be no discrepancies. That's the text that we use today. And that's this one I have right here. I'm showing it right here. This one here. That's the Hafs text. The Arabic on this side. Now, what's fascinating, they said that this came from a rendition of Kiryat and Ahruf, a certain well, what is Kiryat Ahruf? How do we define that? Writing, what's the word?
The readings, you mean?
Readings, yeah.
Or variant text readings, yeah.
Variant readings that were put together by readers and also professors of readers.
Narrators of those readers.
In the 9th century.
That's correct.
Hafs, and we're going to see this in another episode, Hafs is just one of 31 that we have found today.
And here's the thing, we're going to talk about this because Ibn Mujahid is the one who selected those. And just like Uthman took it upon himself to decide something, Ibn Mujahid also took it upon himself to decide readers as well.
So these readers have differences, variants. We've counted up to 59,000, almost 60,000 of these variants. But Hafs is just one of them. And it's attributed to him. The final Quran is attributed to one reader who died in 805.
That's right.
805, early 9th century. That's over 1,000 years ago. So Muslims have known about this for 1,000 years. Here's the irony. How do they know it's Hafs? Where is Hafs' manuscript?
There isn't any such thing as Hafs' manuscript or original Hafs' manuscript.
We don't have his manuscript.
It's all orally.
That's right. It's all what we think or is attributed to him. So that's the 1924 Hafs text. That rendition has only been around since for about 94 years.
And here's another thing, Dr. J. Isn't it true that if you go to the introduction for the 1924 Cairo edition, they tell you clearly that they did not rely on any manuscripts?
That's right, they did not. It was only on the Kiryat and Ahruf, in this case, choosing one out of 37, really, that we've only found 31 of them. There will probably be, we're still looking for about another 6 that we have found in local stores around the Middle East. So they are there. It's not that these are being hidden. We can find them. So now we get 390 erasers. Now take a look at there. Can you see the erasers there?
It's very clear. I mean, sometimes it's so clear that there is a gap that is unusual because when you look at the way the text is written, sometimes they don't have these gaps unless you have removed something.
Yeah, so you can see they're intentionally changing the text. Here's some examples. The Topkapi that we've talked about, you can see clearly where the eraser is in Surah 73, Ayah 20. 2/3 of the night.
And we can see that the Topkapi was also edited later. Why? Because we have red dots, which is diacritical markings that were added at a later time.
At a much later time in a different color.
Exactly.
Here's an example of the Husseini Cairo. That's one in Egypt. And there you can see in chapter 49, verse 6, where you can the word fasaka is used in this manuscript. The word fasiku is used instead in the 1924 Hafs text. So there you can
one
see.
is a verb. This one is a noun describing somebody, actually, an adjective.
And we're assuming that because it's an erasure. Here is one from the Petropolitan text. You can see we've circled where the eraser is. And we don't even sure what is it that they've erased there. If it's too bad now, we'll never know.
That's right.
But we know what the 1924 text says. Here's from chapter 7, verse 158. The Sana Musaf. When you look at that, letters are erased between the words you all and of whom. We don't know in the modern time what was erased there.
I can see the pain in your face because there's a lot of stuff that is missing, and I agree with you.
Well, the pain should be in the Muslim's face, not in mine. I think this is amazing. This is great what Dan has found because Dr. Brubaker is showing that this idea that this is complete, unchanged, and eternal is going right out the window when you look at these examples.
Do you care to tell us where he's at in his basically
We're going to get
research?
to that when we finish this. And I'm waiting that to the end because I want that to be
Wonderful.
the bunch.
Wonderful.
So now we get to St. Peter. This is not one of the six. This is another one in St. Petersburg that he's now just looking at even as we speak.
right.
And here you can see the Hijazi manuscript in chapter 26, verse 70. Two words were erased after the word what and before the words do you worship. So I would love to know what is it they've erased there.
And by the way, when you say Hijazi, we're talking about some of the earliest manuscripts of the Quran. So this shows that even as early as that time, corrections were taking place.
There you go. Here now, then we found, this is fascinating, erasers overwritten, where they've erased it and they wrote over top.
It's almost like you use a whiteout and you write over it.
560 examples of this.
Not one, not two.
You want to go on, don't go all the way up to
560.
560, but you can see we're talking about hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds
That's right.
of these erasers. Here you can see an entire sentence that was erased and then written over top. I would love to know what they erased. Here you can see example of the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. There you can erasers in chapter 11, verse 111 and 112. You can see some erasers there. Another example here is in the Petropolitanus again. There you can see quite clearly where the eraser is. And what's interesting that you notice there about the letter they replaced it with?
There is the letter Da, and it's stretched out, as you can see, to cover the whole gap that was erased. Because normally you're not going to write it this way.
No. So that's an elongated stretching.
Exactly.
There's a name for that.
Meshk.
Meshk.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there's an example of meshk that you have right there in Surah 3, Ayah 171. Here's another example, St. Petersburg manuscript that's up in Russia on, and I think this is 7, verse 189. And then you get another example here of another, and this is overwriting. They didn't even bother to erase. They just wrote over top. So you can see both the lower text and the upper text, what they erased. This is a lot easier.
And what I like about some of them are written in a different color, like red. You can see.
Even
Yes.
red, yeah. They're not even trying to. So it's obvious that the earliest compilers of the Quran were not at all interested in hiding this.
What I want to emphasize, and I said that before, brother, is that it seems to me that the early Muslims were really not looking at this as a fixed text. They had no problem writing with a different color. They had no problem making additions. They were probably, yes, modifying, editing, doing things, but it's not as rigid as we hear today. To them, it didn't appear to be that way.
Yeah, and they didn't have any problem because they didn't think it was a difficulty.
That's right.
They didn't. I don't even think they made the claims that they're making today. I wouldn't be very interested to know whether or not they would say that this is eternal, whether or not they would say that it was complete and unchanged. I would love. Well, we already know it's already changed. So these claims, these 4 claims, are modern Muslims who have to say that
correct.
because the Quran has no other authority. Or let me put it even more strenuous. Muslims have no other authority than the Quran. And how are you going to make the Quran eternal? How are you going to make it so it's the greatest of all revelation? It has to be eternal, above criticism. Here's an example of the Topkapi, chapter 70, verse 32, an overwriting with not even erasing it. They didn't even bother to erase it. They just wrote over top of it. Another example in the S.I.N manuscript, chapter 3, verse 104. Now we get to the selective coverings. Now these are, I find, the most fascinating. These are coverings over words and sometimes entire phrases to hide the text. You can
Correct.
see where it's censoring it. This is
Like the
straight
word
censorship.
kalala, for instance, in one of those.
We're going to
was
see some
covered.
examples. Here is covering of the Hul-Husayni text that's in Cairo, chapter 2, verse 187. Covers something between the words so eat and until. Whereas today the Quran reads, eat and drink until the white thread of dawn appear. I'd love to know what they're covered. Wouldn't it be able to great to just pick it up and look and see underneath?
That's right. That's
Maybe
right.
someday we could do that. Here's an example again with Hul-Husayni, chapter 2, verse 191 to 193. And those of you who want to see this in more depth, you can go back, look at the slides, pause them, and just look and see how these
Absolutely.
change the text.
They're going to be available for them.
Take a look at this one here. How many different coverings do you see on just one page?
A lot.
I see 1, 2,
Starting
3,
from every
4,
line, every line
5,
has-
6, almost 7 different coverings. It almost makes it almost absolutely haphazard to read it when you have that many coverings. Then we get to selected coverings overwritten. So here they have covered it, and then they've written over something over top. 210 that Dan gave me back in 2014. And other things that he came up with were these tapings. These are tapings. Now look at the one on the left-hand side. He saw the taping at the top, thinking that maybe it's there to something had been damaged. But when he looked on the back side, there's no damage whatsoever. So it's obviously that they were not trying to repair anything. They were covering up words, complete words. And what's more, when you look at all the words around it, it fits the standardized text today.
Correct.
If you look at the one in the middle and the one on the right-hand side, you can see quite a few coverings there. In the one in the middle, I see at least 4 coverings. The one on the right-hand side, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 different coverings on just that one page.
That's correct.
So, 2,200 corrections in total.
Wait, you said Dan was looking for 5, maybe 10.
I know, and this is in 2014. Guess what they're up to today? Over 4,000, double that number.
Double even this number.
That's when we just phoned him up just a little while ago. Now they're up over 4,000 corrections that they have. We're going to be going for years looking at all these corrections. It's going to take an awful long time to unpack them, to look at them, to try to see how they change the text, how they change the meaning. This idea that this is a perfect Quran that's never been changed, what are you going to do? That they all, and here's what's really fascinating. When he looked at them, he noticed that these corrections do not just happen at one period. They continue up through the 8th century, up through the 9th century.
And we can even keep on going. After that, who knows? In the 10th and 11th and the 12th century, what will you find?
There you go. There's an awful lot of research yet to be done.
That's right.
So that he said these are intentional changes. In every case, these are human hands doing the changes. And that in every case, they were standardizing the text, bringing it down to one standard. Now tell me if that's not human intervention.
Absolutely. And once again, like I said, it seems to me that the early Muslims did not view the text with the same rigidity that we see today.
Okay. Well, my conclusion already, you can see where I'm going to go with this. We've now looked at the 2 different compilations. We've now looked we've looked at the 6 earliest manuscripts, and now we have just gone through the corrections. 2,200 corrections that we looked at in 2014, up to over 4,000 corrections. Insertions, deletions, coverings, tapings, without even erasers, writing over top, and also coverings written over top. Tapings as well. To me, Al-Fadi, what does it say? Well, I'll tell you what it says to me. It says that this is not from God, this is not from Muhammad. These corrections, from what Dan has found, continue in these manuscripts up until the 9th century. So when was the Quran finally written down? When was it written down?
Obviously, more research is being done and more research has been done, and we will continue to collect data to try to come up with a date. But it seems to me, based on what you're saying, it's at least 200 years so far that we're talking about.
Before we do that, I want to go and look at one manuscript in particular. We're going to do that in the next episode, and that is a Sana. We're going to look at this palimpsest that you mentioned earlier.
And give us a teaser so that the people know why they need to watch the next one.
This is probably the most problematic of the manuscripts because it has 2 different layers. This is the one discovered in 1975, and now the ink is starting to bleed through. But more than that, when they put it under ultraviolet light, they can separate it. And they're looking at these 2 different layers, and they're finding that they do not match. Wow. And wait till you find out what we do know about these 2.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard the man talking about the Sana manuscript, and this is why we want you to join us again next episode to basically hear and see the evidence that will be presented to you. But really, here is my appeal to you as my Muslim friends who are watching. Does this sound to you as a book revealed from heaven that is perfect, that is preserved, that is complete? I challenge you to think about that. Lord bless you. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss future videos. And please consider becoming a patron on patreon.com/Sierra International.